In the glittering mansion of Bel Air, I once thought I had everything. But that night, a death sentence for kinship was signed, and I was the only one who saw their souls crumble. My name is Chloe Sterling, and this is the story of how my family tried to steal everything from the man who gave them the world, and how he taught us all what legacy truly means. The champagne glasses clinked with a hollow sound that night, echoing through the marble halls of our Bel Air estate like a death knell I was too naive to recognize. My mother, Diana Sterling, stood at the center of our grand living room in a shimmering evening gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, her perfectly manicured hand raised in a toast that made my stomach turn. My father, Victor Sterling, stood beside her with that self-satisfied smirk I had grown to despise, his expensive suit unable to hide the ugliness beneath. The occasion was a celebration, or at least that is what they called it. My grandfather, Edward Sterling, had just signed over his estate, his fortune, everything he had built over 70 years of hard work and sacrifice. The soft jazz music from his vintage record player, the one he treasured from his youth, provided an ironic soundtrack to what I now recognize as one of the cruelest nights of my life. I sat in the corner of the room, perched on the edge of an antique chair that had belonged to my grandmother, watching my parents revel in what they believed was their victory. The scent of expensive champagne mixed with my mother's overpowering perfume, creating a nauseating cocktail that seemed to perfectly represent everything wrong with this moment. Diana raised her glass higher, her voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. Finally, this massive fortune is in the hands of its rightful owners. No more of that old man scattering money everywhere like some kind of delusional saint. My father laughed, a harsh sound that had none of the warmth a son should have when speaking of his father. He actually thought that ridiculous donation contract would save his soul. Pathetic. We are the ones who deserve to enjoy this wealth. We are the ones who will actually appreciate it. Something inside me snapped. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, my voice cutting through their celebration like ice. Did he sign it willingly, or was he coerced? The room fell silent. My father's face darkened, his hands slamming down on the mahogany table hard enough to rattle the crystal decanters. What did you just say, Chloe? Your grandfather was tired. He wanted a simple life. This was his choice. His eyes flashed with something that looked dangerously close to a threat, and I felt a chill run down my spine. But I could not let it go. A simple life so simple that he could not even stay for his own victory celebration? My mother's laughter was brittle, forced. Don't be ridiculous, Chloe. Your grandfather is old and sentimental. He probably went to bed early. You know how he gets. But I did know how he got, and this was not it. My grandfather, Edward Sterling, was many things, but he was not a man who went to bed early when something important was happening. He was not a man who would simply hand over his life's work without a fight, no matter how tired he might be. After the party ended and my parents had drunk themselves into a stupor celebrating their supposed victory, I went to my room and found an envelope on my pillow. The handwriting was my grandfather's, elegant and steady despite his 70 years. Inside was a single sentence that would haunt me for days to come. Keep your heart clean, Chloe. When the storm comes, you will need it. I sat on my bed, staring at those words, feeling a sense of dread creeping over me like a cold fog. What storm? What did he know that I did not? The next morning came too quickly. The sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows felt harsh and unforgiving as I dressed for what my parents had cheerfully announced would be a quick trip to LAX to see grandfather Edward off on his journey. They spoke about it over breakfast with the same casual cruelty that had characterized the previous night, discussing their plans to renovate the mansion, to finally get rid of all that old man clutter, as my mother so delicately put it. The drive to Los Angeles International Airport was torture. I sat in the back seat of my father's BMW, squeezed between the cold leather and my grandfather's quiet presence. Edward sat by the window, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap. There was something about his stillness that unnerved me. It was not the stillness of defeat, but of someone waiting, watching, preparing. My parents chattered on their phones in the front seat, already making appointments with interior designers and financial advisors, dividing up assets they had only just acquired. The casual way they discussed dismantling my grandfather's legacy, as if he were not sitting right there, listening to every word, made me want to scream. Chloe, my grandfather said softly, his voice barely audible over my parents' conversation. Do you remember what your grandmother used to say? That blood does not create loyalty, but choice does? I turned to him, seeing something in his eyes that I had not noticed before. A sharpness, a clarity that seemed at odds with the frail old man my parents had been describing for months. Yes, grandfather, I remember. Before he could say more, my father's voice cut through from the front seat. Enough with the sentimental nonsense, Edward. We are at the airport. The scene that unfolded at the passenger drop-off zone would be seared into my memory forever. My father pulled up to the curb with a screech of brakes and practically threw my grandfather's suitcase onto the sidewalk. There you go, old man. Your flight is about to board. My grandfather stood slowly, with more dignity than my father had shown in years. He looked at Victor with eyes that suddenly seemed capable of seeing right through him. "Where is my boarding pass?" my mother's hesitation was telling. "Oh, it is an electronic ticket. You can figure it out at check-in. We have an important meeting." My father smirked, and I saw something cruel flash across his face. "Just go to counter 14. You have always been good at figuring things out on your own, right? Counter 14? My grandfather's voice was soft but sharp as a blade. A flight to nowhere? "Did you really think I would accept this humiliation?" My mother's voice rose, taking on a shrill quality. "Stop being dramatic, Edward. You signed the papers. You agreed to this. Now you have to accept it." She turned to me, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Chloe, say goodbye to your grandfather." I felt my throat tighten as I reached out to take his hand. "Grandfather, you will call me, won't you?" His grip was surprisingly strong as he held my hand, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me catch my breath. "I will call, my dear. And that call will be when the real game begins." Before I could ask what he meant, my father and mother were already climbing back into the car. They drove away without a backward glance, leaving my grandfather standing alone in the chaos of LAX's departure zone. I pressed my face to the rear window, watching as he calmly sat down on a bench near gate 14, pulled out his phone, and began making calls. 29 missed calls later, I would understand what he had meant. The afternoon sun was setting over Los Angeles when my phone started buzzing incessantly. I was in my room, trying to process the morning's events, when I noticed the notifications. 29 missed calls from Grandfather Edward. 29. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Why would he call so many times? What could possibly be so urgent? Downstairs, I could hear my parents laughing, the sound of cork popping from another champagne bottle. They had moved their celebration to an upscale restaurant in downtown LA for lunch, and had returned home in even higher spirits, if that was possible. The sound of their joy felt obscene given what they had done that morning. I made my way down the grand staircase, my phone clutched in my hand like evidence at a crime scene. The marble steps felt cold under my feet, and the ornate chandelier above cast strange shadows that seemed to move and shift in ways that made me uneasy. My mother was sprawling on the cream-colored sofa in the living room, her shoes kicked off, a glass of champagne in her hand. My father stood by the window, looking out over the manicured gardens with the air of a conquering emperor surveying his domain. They barely noticed me at first, too absorbed in their triumph. My father was speaking loudly on his phone, already discussing investment opportunities and vacation properties. My mother was scrolling through her tablet, looking at expensive furniture and artwork. Then my mother's phone started ringing. The name on the screen made her frown. Grandpa Oliver. She declined the call. Within seconds, it rang again. And again. 10 times in a row, each call more insistent than the last. "That crazy old man," she muttered, finally silencing her phone entirely. "He probably wants to cry and beg for forgiveness for giving us the house. As if we would feel guilty." But then my phone began to vibrate. I looked down at the screen and felt my blood run cold. Grandfather Edward. The same 29 missed calls, and now a new message in our family group chat. With trembling fingers, I opened the message. It was a photo of a document, legal and official looking. The text below it was simple, almost gentle, but it sent ice through my veins. "I hope you will take care of my house as well as I took care of you." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room. My parents had noticed my reaction, and my mother snatched the phone from my hands. "What is this? What did he send?" Before I could answer, my mother's phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. She opened it, and I watched the color drain from her face. "Enjoy the house while it is still yours." Thunder rumbled outside, though the sky had been clear just moments before. The chandelier above us flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness before the lights came back on. When they did, I saw something I had never seen before on my parents' faces. Fear. "He is not a man who gives up easily," I whispered, more to myself than to them. My father spun around, his face red with anger and something else. Something that looked dangerously like panic. "That is impossible. We have the papers. We signed everything. The house is ours." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. My grandfather was many things, but he was not a fool, and we had just treated him like one. The night passed in tense silence. My parents tried to maintain their celebratory mood, but it had soured like old milk. They kept checking their phones, kept looking out the windows as if expecting something terrible to appear. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about those 29 missed calls and wondering what my grandfather had been trying to tell me. Morning came with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. I was awakened by the sound of raised voices downstairs, my mother's shrill tone cutting through the early morning quiet like a knife. I threw on a robe and rushed down the stairs, my heart pounding. A black SUV was parked in our circular driveway, gleaming in the morning sunday. A man in an impeccable black suit stood at our front door, a leather briefcase in his hand, and an expression of professional courtesy that somehow managed to be more intimidating than any show of anger. My parents stood in the doorway, my father trying to block the entrance while my mother hovered behind him, her face pale and pinched. "We do not need a lawyer," my father was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "We completed the property transfer. Everything is legal and done." The man smiled, a small, cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good morning. I am Marcus Thorne, attorney for Edward Sterling. May I come in?" "This concerns the property transfer you just mentioned." Something about his calm demeanor seemed to terrify my father even more than if he had come in shouting. Victor stepped aside reluctantly, and Marcus Thorne entered our home. No, I realized with a jolt, entered what might not be our home anymore, with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what cards he held. We moved to the living room, the same room where we had celebrated just 36 hours earlier. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed harsh and unforgiving, revealing dust motes that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to what was about to unfold. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling," Marcus began, setting his briefcase on the coffee table with a soft thud that sounded like a judge's gavel. "I am here regarding the property transfer that you believe was completed 2 days ago." My father sat forward, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "We do not believe it was completed. It was completed. We have the documents. Edward signed everything." Marcus opened his briefcase with practiced ease. "Yes, Mr. Sterling did sign documents. However, there seems to have been a misunderstanding about what exactly he signed." My mother's voice was shrill. "A misunderstanding? We saw him sign the transfer papers. We were there." Marcus pulled out a document and placed it on the table. "What Mr. Sterling signed was indeed a transfer document. However, it was not a transfer to you. It was a transfer to the Sterling Family Trust, a charitable foundation that Mr. Sterling established 3 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my parents' faces cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then slowly, horrifyingly, understanding. "That is impossible," my father whispered. "We read the papers. We saw them. Did you read them thoroughly, Mr. Sterling, or did you perhaps skim them, eager to get to the signature line?" My mother lunged forward, grabbing the document. "This cannot be legal." He was confused. "He is an old man. We will contest this." Marcus remained infuriatingly calm. "Mr. Sterling underwent a full mental competency evaluation 1 week before signing these documents. He scored perfectly. In fact, the evaluating psychiatrist noted that Mr. Sterling displayed remarkable clarity and strategic thinking for a man of any age." He pulled out another document. "Furthermore, this amended trust agreement was filed with the county recorder's office 1 hour after Mr. Sterling signed it. It transfers all real property, financial assets, and trust funds to the Sterling Family Trust, effective immediately." My father's face had gone from red to a sickly gray. "What are you saying? That we own nothing?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I am saying that as of 48 hours ago, you own nothing that once belonged to Edward Sterling. This includes the property on which you are currently standing." My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. No, this is not possible. We had lawyers review the documents." "Did you? Or did you have your lawyers glance at documents that you assured them were already verified?" Mr. Sterling is a very thorough man. He ensured that every legal avenue was explored and secured before proceeding. I found my voice for the first time since Marcus had arrived. "Where is my grandfather?" Marcus turned to me, and his expression softened slightly. "Miss Sterling, your grandfather asked me to give you this." He handed me a letter, sealed with red wax, old-fashioned and formal. "He also asked me to tell you to find him where sincerity still has value." My parents were spiraling into panic now, my mother pacing back and forth, my father on his phone trying desperately to reach lawyers who were apparently not answering. Marcus stood, preparing to leave, his job apparently complete. "What happens now?" I asked him quietly. "Now," Marcus said, his voice not unkind. "Your parents will need to vacate the premises. The trust is taking possession of all properties formerly owned by Edward Sterling. You have until end of business today to remove your personal belongings." My father slammed his phone down. "You cannot do this. We will fight this. We will sue. You are welcome to try, Mr. Sterling. However, I should inform you that Mr. Sterling anticipated this reaction. He has retained the services of 3 of the top estate law firms in California. Any litigation you attempt will be met with significant legal opposition. And given that the property transfer is completely legal and documented, I suspect you will find no lawyer willing to take your case on contingency." With that, Marcus Thorne left, leaving behind a family in ruins. Or rather, leaving behind 2 people in ruins and 1 granddaughter holding a sealed letter and feeling the first stirrings of understanding. My mother collapsed onto the sofa, her perfectly maintained composure cracking like fine china dropped on marble. "How did this happen? How could he do this to us?" My father paced like a caged animal, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. That old bastard. He played us. He played us from the beginning. I looked at them both, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in years. I saw the greed that had driven them, the arrogance that had blinded them, the cruelty that had allowed them to abandon an elderly man at an airport like unwanted baggage. And I felt something inside me shift. "You did this to yourselves," I said quietly. They both turned to stare at me as if I had slapped them. "What did you say?" my father demanded. I stood up, clutching the letter from my grandfather. "You heard me. You treated grandfather like garbage. You celebrated stealing from him. You abandoned him at an airport. Did you really think there would be no consequences?" My mother's eyes blazed with fury. "How dare you? We are your parents. We gave you everything." "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Grandfather Edward gave me everything. He gave me love, attention, values. You gave me expensive things and impossible expectations. There is a difference." Before they could respond, there was a knock at the door. 2 security personnel stood outside, professional and polite, but unmistakably there on business. They carried an official notice that they posted on the front gate. "Property of the Sterling Family Trust. All trespassing will be prosecuted." The next few hours were a blur of humiliation for my parents. They were allowed to pack personal belongings, but everything else, all the expensive furniture they had been planning to keep, the artwork, the luxury cars in the garage, everything belonged to the trust. They could take only what they had brought into the marriage, and what had been specifically gifted to them personally over the years. It was a remarkably small collection of items. I watched them stuff clothes and toiletries into suitcases, their movements jerky and desperate. My mother kept breaking down into tears, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. My father alternated between rage and attempts to call lawyers who were not returning his messages. "Chloe," my mother pleaded at one point, "talk to your grandfather. Make him see reason. You are his favorite. He will listen to you." I looked at her tear-stained face and felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. "If I talk to grandfather, it will not be to beg for your sake. It will be to thank him for showing me who you really are." By evening, my parents were standing on the sidewalk outside what had been their home for the past 15 years, surrounded by a pathetic pile of luggage. The grand mansion loomed behind them, lit up against the darkening sky. Beautiful and utterly out of their reach, Victor stood there, his expensive suit rumpled, his face haggard. "We are your parents, Chloe. You cannot just abandon us like this." I stood in the doorway, the letter from my grandfather still clutched in my hand. "You abandoned grandfather Edward at an airport. You mocked him. You stole from him. You got exactly what you gave." The security personnel were polite but firm in ensuring my parents left the property. I watched them go, my mother sobbing into her hands, my father's shoulders slumped in defeat. They loaded their bags into a taxi, bound for a modest hotel in a part of Los Angeles they had always looked down on. As the taxi pulled away, I opened my grandfather's letter. His handwriting was as steady and elegant as ever. "My dear Chloe, your parents wanted my house, so I gave them the walls, empty walls, but I left you something else. The truth. When they realize what they have lost, come find me. I will be waiting where sincerity still has value. The address is 5200 Wilshire Boulevard, Suite 5200. Do not delay, my dear. Your true education begins now. With love, Grandfather Edward." I folded the letter carefully and looked back at the mansion, at the home that had witnessed so much pain and pretense. Tomorrow, I would go to my grandfather. Tonight, I would sleep in this house one last time, not as the daughter of thieves, but as the granddaughter of a man who valued justice over comfort and truth over family loyalty that had been poisoned by greed. The address my grandfather had given me led to a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Los Angeles, one of those buildings that seemed to pierce the sky itself. "Grant Industries Tower," the brass plaque announced. 5200 Wilshire Boulevard. I took the elevator to the 52nd floor, my heart pounding with each ascending number. I did not know what to expect. Part of me wondered if my grandfather would be angry, if he would blame me for my parents' actions. But a larger part of me remembered his words. "When the storm comes, you will need it." Your heart, clean and uncorrupted. The elevator doors opened directly into a sprawling office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles. The city stretched out below like a glittering carpet, beautiful and ruthless in equal measure. And there, standing by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, was my grandfather. He turned as I entered, and I was struck by how different he looked from the frail old man my parents had described. His eyes were sharp, alert, filled with an intelligence that age had only refined, not diminished. "Grandfather," I whispered, my voice breaking. He smiled, and it was a smile I remembered from childhood, warm and genuine. "Chloe, my dear girl, I am glad you came." I rushed to him, and he caught me in an embrace that was surprisingly strong. I felt tears streaming down my face, all the tension and confusion of the past days finally breaking free. "I am so sorry," I sobbed. I am so sorry for what they did to you. He held me at arm's length, looking into my eyes with an intensity that commanded my full attention. You have nothing to apologize for, Chloe. You are not responsible for their choices. But I should have done something. I should have stopped them. How? He guided me to a leather chair and sat across from me, his movements graceful despite his years. How could you have stopped them? They made their choices long before that night, long before they thought they could steal from me. I wiped my eyes, trying to compose myself. The lawyer, Mr. Thorne, he said you planned all of this, that you knew what they were going to do. My grandfather leaned back, his expression thoughtful. I suspected, after your grandmother died 5 years ago, I watched your parents change. Or perhaps they simply stopped hiding who they really were. They began asking about the estate, about my will, about what would happen to my assets. Their visits became less about family and more about financial planning. He stood and walked to his desk, pulling out 2 folders, one red, one blue. 6 months ago, I had my lawyers prepare 2 sets of documents. The red folder contained a genuine transfer of assets to your parents, everything they wanted. The blue folder contained the transfer to the Sterling Family Trust. Which one did they sign? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He smiled, but it was not a happy smile. They signed the blue folder, believing it was the red. I never lied to them, Chloe. I told them exactly what I was doing. I said I was transferring my assets. I said I was ensuring the legacy of the Sterling family would continue. Every word was true. They simply heard what they wanted to hear. I looked at the folders, at the evidence of such careful, deliberate planning. But why? Why go through all of this? Why not just refuse to give them anything? My grandfather sat down heavily, and for the first time, he looked his age. Because people reveal their true nature when they believe they have won. If I had simply refused them, they would have painted themselves as victims, as dutiful children denied their rightful inheritance. They might have sued, might have dragged this through courts for years. But by letting them think they had won, by letting them celebrate and show their true colors, I ensured that no court would ever side with them. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. More importantly, I needed you to see it, Chloe. I needed you to see who they really are, what they are capable of when they think no one is watching. Me? Why? Because you are my true heir, Chloe. Not of my money, though that will come, but of my values, my vision, my understanding that wealth without character is just expensive wrapping paper around an empty box. I felt tears welling up again. I do not understand. What do you want from me? I want you to learn, he said simply. I want you to understand that power is not about money or property. It is about choices. Your parents had every material advantage, every opportunity. And they chose greed. They chose cruelty. They chose to abandon me at an airport like a piece of unwanted luggage. His voice hardened slightly. Do you know what I did after they left me there? I sat on that bench at gate 14 and I called them. 29 times. Not because I needed help, but because I wanted to give them one last chance to be human, to feel remorse, to come back. They never answered. Not once. I remembered those 29 missed calls, the way my phone had buzzed incessantly. I answered, I said weakly. You did, he acknowledged. And that, my dear, is why we are having this conversation. Over the next hour, my grandfather explained everything. The Sterling Family Trust was not just a legal maneuver. It was a fully functional charitable foundation focused on education, healthcare, and community support. It had a board of directors, a mission statement, and millions of dollars ready to be deployed for good causes. And I want you to help me run it, he said. I want you to learn how real power works, how wealth can be used to build rather than destroy, to uplift rather than oppress. I felt overwhelmed. I am only 23 years old. I do not know anything about running a foundation. You know more than you think, he said gently. You know the difference between right and wrong. You know that treating people with dignity matters more than treating them with expensive gifts. You know that family is not about blood, but about loyalty, respect, and love. Everything else, we can teach you. What about Mom and Dad? I asked, the question I had been dreading. His expression grew somber. They will face the consequences of their choices. They have no access to my money, no property, no trust fund. They will have to make their own way in the world, perhaps for the first time in their lives. Will you ever forgive them? He was quiet for a long moment. Forgiveness is not the same as trust, Chloe. I forgive them for being human, for being weak, for falling prey to their worst impulses. But I will never again trust them with anything that matters. They burned that bridge themselves. He stood and walked back to the window. Tomorrow there will be a press conference. The media has already gotten wind of the story. Rich man reclaims fortune from greedy children. It is the kind of headline they love. I want you to speak. Me? What would I say? Tell the truth, he said simply. Tell them what you saw. Tell them what you learned. Tell them that family is a privilege, not a right, and that it must be earned through respect and love, not demanded through blood relation. The next morning, the Sterling mansion was surrounded by press. News vans lined the street, cameras and reporters crowded the gates, helicopters circled overhead. The story had exploded across social media, a modern morality tale of greed and justice that people could not stop talking about. Inside, I stood in front of a mirror, trying to steady my nerves. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy or expensive. My grandfather had taught me that in moments of truth, substance mattered more than style. He came to stand beside me, adjusting my collar with gentle hands. "Remember," he said softly, "speak from your heart. The truth needs no embellishment." We walked out together onto the front steps of the mansion. The roar of questions hit us like a wave, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. My grandfather raised his hand, and somehow, incredibly, the crowd quieted. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying despite his age. "I am Edward Sterling, and this is my granddaughter Chloe. We are here to address recent events and to announce the future of the Sterling estate." He gestured to me, and I stepped forward, my hands shaking slightly as I unfolded the speech we had prepared together. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras broadcasting this moment across the country, I decided to speak from memory instead. From the heart, as my grandfather had advised. "My name is Chloe Sterling," I began. 3 days ago, my parents, Victor and Diana Sterling, convinced my grandfather to sign what they believed were documents transferring his entire estate to them. They celebrated by opening expensive champagne and mocking my grandfather's charitable instincts. The next morning, they drove him to LAX and abandoned him at the airport, refusing to even ensure he had proper travel arrangements. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw reporters scribbling frantically, camera operators zooming in. What my parents did not know was that my grandfather, a man they dismissed as old and confused, was actually 3 steps ahead of them. The documents he signed transferred his assets not to them, but to a charitable trust dedicated to helping others. My parents tried to steal an empire and ended up with nothing but the exposure of their true characters. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Family should protect legacy, not plunder it. When I was left at that airport drop-off zone, watching my grandfather sit alone on a bench while my parents drove away laughing, I did not feel anger. I felt disappointment. Because betrayal does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears the face of the people who are supposed to love you most. My voice grew stronger. My grandfather is not a victim. He is a strategist, a man who understands that the greatest lessons come from allowing people to reveal themselves. He gave my parents exactly what they wanted, the opportunity to show who they really are when they think no one is watching. I looked directly into the nearest camera, and now, the world is watching. Now everyone can see that wealth without character is meaningless, that greed ultimately consumes itself, and that justice sometimes comes not from the courts but from the careful planning of someone who values truth over convenience. I took a breath, feeling my grandfather's steadying presence beside me. Today, I am proud to announce that I will be working alongside my grandfather to manage the Sterling Family Trust. We will focus on education initiatives, healthcare access, and community support. Because integrity must live through the people who choose it, not through the accident of birth or the entitlement of blood relation. The questions came in a rush then, shouted from every direction. But my grandfather stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "We will take questions, but first, I want to say something to my son and daughter-in-law." The crowd went silent, sensing something significant was about to happen. "Victor, Diana, if you are watching this, and I suspect you are, know that I do not hate you. I am disappointed in you. I am saddened by your choices, but I do not hate you. However, I will not enable your destructive behavior any longer. You wanted my house, so I gave you the walls, empty walls that held nothing but your own reflections. What you saw there, the emptiness, the betrayal, the greed that was always inside you. I just gave you the space to see it clearly." His voice softened slightly. "The door to redemption is not locked, but it will not be opened by money or inheritance. It will be opened by genuine change, by acknowledgement of wrongdoing, by making amends not just to me but to yourselves and to the values you abandoned. Until then, you will have to make your own way in the world, as I once did." The press conference lasted another hour. Questions about the legal details, about the trust's mission, about my role in all of this. Through it all, my grandfather remained calm and gracious, his decades of business experience evident in every measured response. Finally, as the sun began to set over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the mansion's grounds, we concluded the conference. As the reporters packed up and the cameras shut down, I saw 2 figures standing at the back of the crowd, half hidden behind a news van. My parents. They looked nothing like the confident, affluent couple who had celebrated 3 nights ago. My mother's designer outfit was wrinkled, her makeup smudged. My father's usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive watch notably absent from his wrist, probably sold already to cover immediate expenses. Our eyes met across the distance. I saw something in their faces that I had never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, but a kind of hollow emptiness. The emptiness that comes from realizing you have thrown away something irreplaceable for something worthless. I expected to feel satisfaction. I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt a deep, aching sadness. These were still my parents, still the people who had raised me, however imperfectly. Seeing them brought so low, so completely defeated, gave me no joy. My grandfather followed my gaze and saw them too. He was quiet for a moment, then he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Do you want to speak with them?" "I do not know," I admitted. "What would I even say?" "Whatever your heart tells you is true," he replied. "But remember, Chloe, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Compassion.